I'm Old Sneelock. Welcome to another episode of Old Sneelock's Workshop. This saw is pretty much unsafe at any speed. It has a rip fence, but the rip fence doesn't square up. I can have it over here or over there, it doesn't care. So I need to change out this rip fence. It's got all the mechanism except it's missing a piece of rubber that goes in here. Little cam latch right here that when I pull this cam up, this presses against the back of the table, and it's supposed to pull this device up against this fence. There's a piece of aluminum channel along the front, and this is supposed to have a rubber piece that goes up against that and pulls it straight, and then when you latch it like that, that rubber is supposed to grip this thing and make it so it doesn't slide back and forth. Now, in a pinch, yeah, you can run it without the piece of rubber in it. I don't recommend it. This can move. I don't know. There might have been a piece of rubber that went on the end of this to give it a little bit more grip. But in any case, I don't like this fence. We'll have to come up with something different for that. There's something missing that not everybody thinks about. Matt thought about it. There's a riving knife that's supposed to show up right here behind the blade. There's nothing showing a mounting point for a riving knife on this device. So I think if I was going to be working on this thing, I would be drilling a hole in this aluminum. Let's get this camera around where you can see it. There's supposed to be a riving knife, which is a metal blade that's not sharp. It's only to keep the wood, once it passes the cut, it fills the kerf and makes it so the kerf can't close up and pinch the back of the blade. Now, why are we concerned about that? Well, for a couple of reasons. If the wood comes back together and pinches on the back of the blade and this blade is coming up, it can lift the wood off the table and shove it back at you at a high rate of speed. Because this blade is moving. No question about it, it is a smoking fast blade. And we don't want to have any pieces of wood coming back at you, because the place that's going to get you is the place where you don't want to be got. Lots of soft tissue right here. Even if it's a blunt-ended board, it'll give you a heck of a knock. If it's a splinter, it'll go through you. I've had a splinter go completely into my arm about 3 inches, just because I was walking by a pallet that had a broken piece on it, and I brushed up against the pallet and it just went right on in it. Ended up going to the doctor, getting it cut out. That was an interesting experience that I don't want anybody else to share. Painful all the way around. So the riving knife keeps the blade from getting pinched by the wood, and it doesn't let the wood get flung around. So That's one of the things that I need to do, is put a riving knife on this saw. The other thing that needs to happen, I need a blade guard. Now once again, this blade is safe because I've got it unplugged. It won't start up and spin, but it's still sharp as the dickens. Just having it sit out there is dangerous. Smacking your hand on that, if you start to trip and fall and you grab a hold of something, you can really nick yourself up. My father had one of those small direct drive contractor saws, something from the 70s, might have been 80s even. Aluminum frame, aluminum table, lightweight. He used it in his workshop because he had just a little workshop out at the farm. Well, Dad dropped something on the floor and bent down to pick it up. And when you're my age, I'm close to the age that Dad was at the time this happened. If anything, I'm a little older. At my age, when I drop something on the floor, I quite often need to have some means of support so I can bend down and pick the thing up. Well, when you got a flat spot next to you, the common thing to do is put your hand on things. Well, the saw just happened to be running, and he ended up putting his hand on the blade. Now, this is really quick reaction time. He only just touched it, but it cut a groove through the meat of these 4 fingers. Didn't hit the bone, but there's tendons in there that make it so your fingers move. He was lucky enough he didn't cut those. But he was laid up for a good couple months, hand all bandaged up, couldn't do anything, because it took that long for all those tissues and tendons and ligaments and everything in that hand to heal up. And you can't do anything with it. And since it's your right hand, that means you're doing everything left-handed. Not a good thing to do. So how do you prevent that? Well, people say, well, just put a guard on the blade. But what if you're doing something where you're making a dado, and you want to have the blade go through the wood, but not all the way. That means that blade's over there whirling around and it can cut your hand. Now I know, safe stop. Get yourself a safe stop and everything's good. Well, yeah, no. It's not an end-all be-all. Because remember I told you, all you gotta do is just touch that blade and it's sharp. It'll cut you. So even if it does stop, you're gonna have some serious problems. You're gonna at least cut yourself. Now I know they show that the hot dog doesn't have the skin broken. Doesn't matter. That's best case. Worst case is, that happens, you get freaked out and stumble, and you fall into it, and your hand runs across that blade, you're gonna hurt yourself. So don't rely on the safety devices, I guess is where I'm going. They're a good idea. Having that saw stop on there probably saves some fingers. Being careful is a better way to do things. I call it a TSDAA, 2-second dumbass attack. All it takes is a little slip, and the next thing you know, you're in the hospital getting stitches, or you're having to walk around with a bandage on your hand for quite a while, or in my case, bandage on your knee because you trip over a beam. Telling you to be careful, telling you to be safe, that's good. It's not necessarily a bad thing to do to tell people. It's not going to prevent them from having a problem. It's human nature. You get startled, your hand jerks, you're thinking of something else, or the phone rings and you go to pick it up, and you've got something in your hand, or you're standing around moving equipment, and next thing you know, you're caught. a rule is never wear gloves when using rotating equipment. Now, why is that? Well, you know, gloves are going to protect me from cutting my hand. Cutting your hand is bad. If you put your hand up against a spinning blade and you got a pair of gloves on, that blade is going to grab a hold of those gloves. And if you're unlucky, it's going to grab a hold of them tight enough that it's going to pinch off on your fingers and just pull you right on in. Had a gentleman when I worked, well, it was just before I started there, Douglas Corporation over in Teconcha. He was running a sander. Well, he was sanding a part in a lathe. And you're going to see me using a piece of sandpaper on a flat pad on my hand underneath the device, or under whatever's in the lathe spinning. And I'm going to have my hand like this. Now, why is that? Well, if that sandpaper catches, it's going to go and away from me. Why is that? Well, I had a 2-second dumbass attack. I was handling a piece of rough steel, rusty and old. I wanted to put it in the lathe and cut off a chunk. I wanted to turn a short piece of it. And it was a long bar. Rather than walk over to the saw and cut off a chunk and put it in the lathe, I put the whole thing in the lathe. So the end was out there wagging around, and I put it on top of a roller stand that we used for pipe so that it wouldn't bend and flip and flop all over the place. And I put a sawhorse in front of it so that people wouldn't walk into it. I was expecting to cut off multiple pieces, and I thought I would save myself some trouble by cutting off multiple pieces. Just use the parting tool, cut it off, cut it off, cut it off, cut it off, and I would eventually use up that bar. But because it was rusty and dirty, I used a pair of leather gloves. I had a pair of leather gloves on. So I started the lathe, and the part was spinning at a high rate of speed. I reached out with that glove and I was just going to touch the surface to see if it was bouncing. Well, I touched the top of the rod as it was spinning. The rod gripped a hold of that glove and folded it over. It caught a hold of that glove, folded it over, and peeled that glove right off my hand. Didn't break my fingers. Didn't drag me into the machine. The guy at Douglas Corporation was running a piece of sandpaper, and he took that sandpaper and wrapped it around the part, and you've seen people do that, you know, a piece of emery cloth, long strip. They put it around there and they pull on it because they think, well, that's going to make it cut faster. I'm putting more pressure on it. We can go into that in another time. What it does is it makes a noose, like you've seen a ratchet strap. No, you've seen a strap wrench that goes around a shaft and you pull on the handle and it pulls the strap tight. Well, when you do that with that piece of emery paper and make that go all the way around the shaft, you're setting yourself up for a strap wrench. Because if you're sanding and you're pulling on the thing, as long as you're pulling on it, those two pieces of sandpaper are apart. They don't catch each other, it just sands. Not well, but it does. The minute you let go a little bit, the top is still engaged with that piece of rod. So the top piece of that sandpaper tries to wrap around that shaft. And as soon as it goes down and catches the bottom piece, folds over, we're going to imagine that this is a piece in a lathe. And I'm pulling on two pieces of sandpaper. The two straps are apart. I release that just a little bit, and that top part catches. All it's got to do is that. And now, you can pull as hard as you want. You're not going to take that strap off that bar. And you're thinking, well, I'll just let go. Something I read, I don't know have any other data other than the theory that the guy presented, but I believed him because I've had something similar to happen to me. Remember the leather glove? He said, humans have a reflex. If you start to drop something, you grip tighter. If something is being yanked out of your hands, you grip tighter. He called it the monkey reflex. When you're hanging from a branch, if you start to slip, you grip tighter. So you're running that piece of sandpaper and it winds up like that, and you pull on it. The more it pulls on you, the harder you pull on it. Let me tell you, a metal lathe, it's got some horsepower. A lot of leverage, gearing. It's designed to cut steel with a sharp blade, of course, but it'll even cut steel with a dull one. So, make a long story short, don't hold your sandpaper like that. Don't hold it like this, thinking, well, it won't catch. It will. And the first thing it's going to do, it's going to pull on you, and you're standing out here in front of this moving piece of equipment. It pulls on you. There's nothing for you to grab a hold of except the stuff that's in front of you, and you're tripping. You got something that you can't step over because it's the frame of a lathe, and you fall forward. All it takes is falling forward, and that thing's going to grab a hold of you. And like the guy at Douglas Corporation, it caught a hold of him. He was running that sandpaper. It caught a hold of his hand and pulled his arm into that lathe and just folded it up, bits and pieces. Ripped it out of his shoulder. So he was really screwed up. It lost his arm, nearly died. You know, there's really no pressure point when you rip your arm off. It goes right into the heart. There's an aorta that attaches almost directly to that arm. They're lucky that they got him in the hospital. He didn't die. So, try not to do any 2-second dumb attacks. Take my word for it. It's unpleasant, uncomfortable, and usually involves a lot of screaming and crying at the end. So, riving knife, guard, saw stop if you got it and can afford it and want it. I'm not telling anybody they have to. I'm not saying it's going to make everything safe. It's going to make it better. Another thing that you want to have is a guard on this belt. This belt, if it's spinning, once again, I have the blade have the saw disconnected. It's not hooked up to anything. If it's spinning, the top belt is moving that way, the bottom belt is moving that way. You put your finger in there, it's going to grab a hold of that finger. And my dad, using my dad as an example a lot because he worked in a factory for many years, very fortunate to have all of his fingers to the day he died. He was trying to pull a belt around over the top of a pulley, and he reached up, grabbed a hold of the belt and pulled on it, and there was a load on the belt. He pulled on it and let go, and it snatched his hand and pulled it around the pulley. Nearly cut this finger, nearly cut the tip of it off. A guard makes it so that you don't accidentally stick your hand into there. This thing has got a lot of places to get in trouble with. It's got holes in there you can stick your finger through. Grab a hold of something that's spinning in there. Got a blade that can cut you. Got a belt that can pinch you. It's got a place where if there's no riving knife, the wood can pinch shut and grab a hold of that blade, and the blade will flip it up and toss it at you. Very nice piece of equipment. Table saw is very handy, does a great job. If you're careful, you'll be fine. But you don't ever rely on something to protect you. You have to look at it and say, okay, what's going to happen to me? Because something will. Might not be today, might not be tomorrow, might not be 10 years from now, but it will. If you're not paying attention, it will. So that's enough of the long story. If you have any suggestions for new video, questions about today's video, or any of the other videos on the channel, just drop a note in the comments. You know I read them all. Thanks for watching. If you have any suggestions for new video, questions about today's video, or any of the other videos on the channel, just drop a note in the comments. You know I read them all. Thanks for watching.
Not to be viewed by anyone under the age of 13 in the U.S. or 16 in the European Union without the express written permission of the parents or the legal guardians of the underage person. Such written permission must be on file at the local government entity in charge of enforcing the rules and regulations established by the FTC. Anyone violating these terms is admitting by default that they hold harmless the owners and operators of this channel. Any and all questions should be addressed to your local branch of the FTC.